Hello and welcome to the Neijiaquan podcast. This is Isaac. This is episode 13. In this episode, Jess and I discuss the famous teacher Hsing Yuan, who was one of Bruce's Yiquan teachers and in Hong Kong. We also talk about dissolving points in the head and some tips on that. Also, on our Patreon, we've got an interview with our good friend Eric Peters. You can check that out. Part two will be out sometime in the next couple weeks. And Jess also has his Bagua training program on there. All right, well, I hope you enjoy the episode and take care.
Welcome back to the Neijiaquan podcast with Isaac and Jess. We've been talking about the Opening the Energy Gates of Your Body book and working our way through the biography in the beginning. At this stage is when the author's training turns towards Hong Kong after doing a lot of training in Japan and Taiwan. And the book only touches on it briefly, so we wanted to look back at some of the other sources and learn a little bit more about his journey and training in Hong Kong. And looking at an old issue of Fighting Arts International from the 80s, there's an interesting paragraph here. He writes, in 1974, I tried to enter mainland China from Hong Kong, but the country was still in the throes of the Cultural Revolution, and I had to face the fact that it was closed to foreigners. He talks about some of the training he did there, and he says, and for a few months, I trained with the late Hsing Yuan, a disciple of Wang Zhangzhai. I studied with him at night and went to the parks in the mornings. And he goes on to say he went investigating various Hong Kong martial artists and doing some sparring and push hands and other stuff with other teachers there. So that's all he has to say about that. But that's a telling piece of history because the system that Master Han taught is called Yiquan, and that's the martial art of standing. And so we wanted to investigate that a little further and see how it relates to the standing that we do in opening the energy gates. And so I drew some things from his descriptions in The Power of Internal Martial Arts about Master Han. He says that I worked on the standing practice of Yiquan with Wang Shujin and with others, including Hsing Yuan, who was a disciple of Yiquan's founder. And so that's as much as he'll say about that. So we looked further and dug up some more biographical information from a variety of websites. It says here that Hsing Yuan was born in 1915, and at the age of 16, he moved to Shanghai to learn and become a disciple of the famous Wang Xianzai. When Master Han was young, he always wanted to test himself and never turned down any challenge. He won so many fights, he made a reputation for himself and was nicknamed the Watch Tiger of Yiquan. Another website says, Han accumulated a reputation within and outside the Yiquan school. He beat up all comers with one punch, stepping with his left and his right. During one challenge match, the teacher stopped the class and asked Han if he would like to try. Master Han loved to exchange fists and politely said yes. One intent, one shape, one movement sent the teacher flying away. Humbled but virtuous, the teacher stated to all the students, please, you should all train with this man. His kung fu is great. And there's a number of stories out there about Master Han being pretty much a badass street fighter type of guy. And yet, mysteriously, a lot of his training was in stance and standing postures. And so, that brings up the idea of using standing as one of your primary practices for martial arts and fighting and sparring. And I think, Isaac, we've both experienced that, standing can be a powerful tool for martial arts training.
Yeah, well, and he was also, he and Wang Shujing had, the same teacher. And, clearly it goes to that whole thing about Yiquan, about, the main thing for fighting is standing, that, clearing the mind is the whole thing there.
So a big part of it is letting your mind be so calm that then you can react faster.
Right. I mean, and then, Yiquan is essentially a modified Xing Yi in a sense. So its techniques are based on the Xing Yi 5 elements, but they're done, with a bit more Tai Chi and Western boxing influence. But, essentially the technical part is from Xing Yi. So it has a lot of those same components, but it's, like we talked about Kenichi Sawai with the Taiki Ken,
Hmm.
It's the same, it's the same art, right?
Definitely.
So, Bruce hasn't talked about Han that much, but he did mention that he was a pretty serious fighter, and that in his youth, he would go down and he liked to spar with British sailors. That's what Bruce said. That he said that was a group of people he could always count on for getting into a little bit of a row with. So,
down the docks.
Sounds like our kind of guy,
Definitely. So here's another description. During Master Han's lessons, besides teaching pile standing, which means standing practice,
right,
as a vital part of the training, Master Han liked to teach through sparring and let students learn directly from the experience. Although the students sometimes might get hurt, they accepted the sparring training with appreciation. He was a marvelous fighter, and he loved to fight. So, I mean, that's another example of like you mix standing with sparring, and there's stuff in between, but maybe not a whole lot of stuff in between. Those sound like the two main practices.
Yeah, and I think it just goes to show that, these guys really enjoyed martial arts. It's like standing was just the vehicle to getting to be better at fighting. I talked about this before with Bruce. There's that pyramid of, martial arts, qigong or health, and, meditation, and that, you can use all of them to support the others, and just depends on where you put your emphasis, right? So like the Yiquan thing is you do a lot of standing, but it's as the goal is martial arts, right? The goal is fighting, not for example, like doing standing for health, which would look a lot, similar, from the outside. It's just the intent is slightly different.
And the sparring part is the part that you don't necessarily have to do if you want to be doing it just for health and self-awareness. But the sparring can be a, interesting exercise for anybody, as long as, you don't try to fight someone who's really, really good.
Well,
just try someone your own level.
I mean, if fighting is your interest, I mean, if that's why you're training, then, Yiquan, I think it's like Xingyi, where, you do it's sparring, but it's not like for points. It's, like more for practicing techniques, so you don't use full power, for example, but, you also not wearing gloves or anything. So, but it has that sort of Rosho, push hands type of stuff in there as well, and
right. We mostly try to get the opening, and then you hold back a little bit on the power.
Right.
Otherwise somebody's going to get hurt. So yeah, that makes sense.
Right. I mean, so its training method is similar, I think, to Xingyi or Tai Chi, but the container, right, that it uses is the standing, and I think that's what makes it, particularly interesting.
Definitely. And there's a dichotomy there of stillness mixed with the speed of a sparring match, which is intense. So I was going to jump ahead to a few quotes about Yiquan from The Power of Internal Martial Arts by B.K. Francis. He describes it this way. The Yiquan branch of Xingyi was founded by Wang Xiangzai, who was the famous Guo Yunshen's last disciple when he was old. He mixed Guo's Xingyi with Western boxing, Buddhist Qigong, and Bagua foot movements to create Yiquan, known as mind intention boxing. And then he goes on to speak about it a little bit more. Yiquan focuses strongly on Santi standing. Practitioners do the form for decades, frequently devoting half or more of every practice to Santi. However, the Yiquan school also does Santi differently from the other schools. Here, the Pichuan posture is replaced by 8 standing postures at heights ranging from above the head to the lower dantian. The most well-known one is called holding a ball, or universal post. And so that comes this idea of, we've heard before in Yiquan, of holding 8 different postures for 5 minutes each to create a 40-minute sort of baseline for your practice. And here he describes each of those as a type of Santi. So, like, what do you make of that?
Well, I mean, I think that just in Santi just means, a standing posture. He's just referring to it as the method of Santi, right? It's not the
right. So the same requirements. You you coil your waist a certain way, you wrap your shoulders a certain way, you lift the top of the head a certain way. Is the same in Santi as it is in
yeah, and I think it's more things like the breathing the breathing stuff, the training, breathing, following the intent, stuff like that.
So the Neigong that you do within Santi, you do within these 8 postures as well.
Right. So the Santi is, in a sense, a more complete posture, right? Like in terms of you get more from doing just that one posture than you will from all 8 of the Yiquan postures, but it's a lot harder, right? So the effort that you have to put into it is, a lot more than if you do, any kind of standing where your weight's on 2 feet, right? So the advantage of something like Yiquan is because the posture is easier, you can do it for longer. And then, so you're standing for 3 or 4 hours instead of 1, right?
Sure.
And really then can emphasize the standing part, right? And there are one-legged postures in Yiquan. It's just the majority of them, usually that's the last one or one of the last ones. And, all the rest are done on both feet. So it just makes it easier to hold the posture and do the internal work and, just do it for extended periods of time.
So I wanted to jump to another thing. Bruce talks about here his experience of standing and the power of internal martial arts. He says, what I gained immediately from each day of standing was a concrete way to actually go inside myself and find out how my body and chi worked from the inside out. Although this intense focus on standing shifted and broadened for more than 15 years, standing Qigong was a basic part of my personal practice. And then he says, over time, I could feel my arms and legs joining in an unbroken concrete way to my spine. Soon, bit by bit, I began to feel the sensation of Qi in every place in my body. Sometime later, I began to concretely feel Qi motion emanating from my lower dantian and feel it actually becoming the motivating force behind the movements of my limbs and hips. And that reminds me of Kenichi Siwai's statement of, bit by bit, you start to feel the Qi is the most important thing about standing and get to know yourself from the inside out.
I mean, that just summed up the entire decades of practice, basically. Like, that's the whole thing, it's just starts to feel like it's all one thing, and then that one thing starts to feel like it's you, and that you're generating that one thing from your lower dantian, and that your intent is the driving force and all that. And it's just that's straight up. But so that's not he's talking about standing as a more general thing as opposed to specifically energy gates, but it's the same. You're going to go through the same process, basically.
It seems like a unique way to really weave your body together piece by piece, bit by bit, and give your mind time to really get settled inside you.
Yeah, and I think the chunk there he mentions is that it's the unifying part, right? That your body becomes one thing instead of many things, right? So you have that sort of unit, and that's Wang Shujing talked about it. They all talked about that sense of when you have that intent and you're connects to your body, that's what it's all about.
That's that mind body thing that's so popular in internal martial arts.
Yeah, the term that usually right, the term that usually gets used is something like unification, or that when things unify. That's the sort of, big signal that you're ready to move on to the next phase of practice or whatever.
Right.
So the first, who knows how long it takes, but let's just say 10 years, right? What you're primarily working on is physical alignments and how to make those physical alignments functional, right? So, you can think of it in terms of, standing and cloud hands standing is the physical alignments, cloud hands and the swings are moving alignments, right? And so like, that's that's basically, it's just like you're having a control of the physical body, right? And then that both sets you up for and leads you into the stuff with the energetics, So it's like it sets you up for it in that you have the ability to feel those things, and you're sensitive enough, and you can stand for long enough that those things actually come up, and you don't, your legs just don't hurt and things like that.
Right.
And it leads you into it, because once you get to that point, like, for example, of dissolving everything down below your feet, you'll start to notice the stuff that wants to come back up, whereas in the beginning, you won't notice it. You'll just feel, the pain in your legs.
Right.
So I think that's, go ahead.
So when just to sort of wrap up, one of the things he says here struck a chord with me, because it really speaks to how his school is constructed. He says here, all the accomplished internal martial artists I have met have that first something that made internal practices very real and immediate to them. For me, it was standing Qigong. And, standing such a big part of his school. And as people have told us over the years, most of his classes have started with standing, and most of our classes have started with standing. It's the thing that really clicked for him. So in all of his martial arts training, it's something that's always going to be included.
Yeah. I mean, I think that comes from that, from the Wangshu Jing, in a sense,
Totally.
that tradition, because, other students of Wangshu Jing that we've met also have, sort of echoed that same sort of thing, that
Totally.
didn't matter what the class was, you'd always start with standing, because that was sort of the core thing. And, I think, Bruce talked about, I heard him mention it to, some Tai Chi guy one time, about how the Tai Chi guy was saying that, when he did Shingi, he couldn't really get didn't feel the energy in his hands as strongly. And, Bruce's remark was essentially, well, that's just because you didn't get it, that you got it in Tai Chi, so that's where you feel it the strongest. If you got it in something like standing, that's where you would feel it the strongest.
Sure.
And, and I think that sort of piece about the thing you're doing when you have the aha moment, it kind of sticks, and sort of like that, because that becomes your thing, quote unquote. Right? Because everybody has their little, like, I don't know, like, thing they want to emphasize, or, their flavor, or, their sort of what we would call style,
Right.
And so whether it's intentional or not, which in Bruce's cases, I think usually it was, or it's just that you develop it over time and it sort of becomes your thing. It's like, you're doing this, quote unquote, the same stuff as everybody else, but you might emphasize a different piece of it than
Right.
your classmates or something, So I think, like you said earlier, I mean, we always, I don't think I've ever done a class where there wasn't at least some, standing involved. And it's because it's just, it's part of it, it's the baseline for everything else. And so,
Exactly.
to leave that out, in a sense, is kind of to leave out the most important part.
Exactly. And just to finish, the last little quote from Power of Internal Martial Arts. The Yiquan method encompasses 8 arm postures for holding the arms in the air, whereas the original, more complete Taoist method includes 200 standing postures. That's
right.
Interesting.
Yeah, well, that's the spiraling energy body stuff, where, and I've never gotten a clear answer as to how they count postures. Right. Is the same posture at different, same hand position at different heights? Is that different postures, or is that one posture? Because I think in each one they say there's 8 postures, but each of those 8 postures could be done at 3 different heights. So I don't know how to, it's I think when you get into counting them. But the thing he's referring to is the Taoist, the Neigong practice of standing, which is more complete than the Yiquan thing. It's what the Yiquan guys took it from, that they borrowed from it, right? Yiquan is this sort of re-engineered, right? Because it's like it got the standing from Hsing Yi, but then it did it more like the Neigong stuff, So it's like it kind of, went back to the source material,
right. Right.
So and some, for example, Wangshu Jing, right? His method of Yiquan included a lot of one-legged standing postures and a lot of things where your arms were out to the side that were not, quote unquote, the typical, Yiquan standing postures, but maybe borrowed a little bit from Bagua and Hsing Yi a little more.
Right. Makes sense. So you ready to move on to the next chunk?
Yeah, let's do it.
So the next place in the practice of the set, we have in the Opening the Energy Gates chapter. This is where we leave off chapter 4, Opening the Energy Gates of the Body. And we made it all the way to the head and the neck. In the beginning, for all the gates of the head, the dissolving process should only reach a depth of 1/2 inch, thereby avoiding the brain. So he starts off basically by saying you don't want to go dissolving deep down in your brain, just sort of around the surface areas at the points he marks. That made sense. He says after a while you can dissolve the entire brain at once, but don't dissolve points in the brain separately. I don't know. Is there anything to add to that?
No, I think we talked about this in the last one, but basically it's fine. That there are there are points in the brain, and basically you don't want to mess with them, and so don't go in there. It's not worth it.
Not worth it. So where we left off was the very first point that he lists, called the crown. The first gate to be dissolved is the exact center of the crown of the head, which the Chinese call Bai Wei, or the meeting of 100 points. So this is where all the dissolving training starts. You start at the very tip top of your head, right at the very sort of highest point of your head, which calls the crown, Bai Wei. What do you think about? Is there any suggestions you have for tapping into that spot?
Well, this is, traditionally, right, this is the point that everything is suspended from, right? So this is the term he uses is ding, right? It's a fixed point. And that, like, getting a sense of that, it's like if you're going to draw a plumb line, right, with a old-timey plumb, you hold it at the top and you let the thing hang, right? And then that's how you get a straight line. And so getting the thing at the top in the right place is the most important part, because everything else is going to kind of, orient toward from that. So in a lot of ways, this is where you're beginning the alignment by finding the point where that thing aligns. If you want to use the more esoteric Taoist thing, that thing aligns with heaven. If you want to be more, just anatomical about it, it's finding the point where the center of your head is over the center of your shoulders, and that's over the center of your hips. And, if you want to get really esoteric, it's about, aligning yourself with the lineage. But all of those things essentially lead to this sense that you are aware of a point, and that point is somehow connected to something above you, and then you start the process of going down.
Mm-hmm. And so, this section contains a whole series of different points. The second one is the third eye, and he says this gate can open up suppressed areas of a person's psyche, which is best under the guidance of a qualified master. So that's the area between your eyebrows there. I think it's okay to dissolve there, but you definitely don't want to overdo it, I suppose.
Yeah, I think with all of this stuff, there's a danger in it. And, of course, if like anything, if you push too hard, you can hurt yourself. But I think you have to be pretty good at it to hurt yourself, if that makes any
Right.
sense. So,
Something actually has to happen, right?
but I think in terms of just as a general thing with all of these points, it's like you're trying to wake your body up. You're not trying to overstimulate it, right? So
That's a key point.
um, you want to, gently awaken these things, and and that as as they awaken, you can start to kind of get a sense of where they're at. I mean, for the first few years that I did this stuff, anytime I focused on that point, especially if I was lying down, it would light up like just, like a giant fucking beam, and it would pulse. And it was a little disturbing at times,
Whoa.
And it was sort of like, okay, I don't think I'm going to mess with that one, And so it was like, I could do it a little bit and it was fine. But if I really went inside of it, it would do this weird thing where it would light up and, sort of like, I just I didn't feel any benefit from it. So why keep, poking it for no reason?
Right.
So I think that was one of those things where I think you might have an indicator that you should back off before, you're going to have to ignore several levels of things going wrong before, you get to anything that's going to really damage you. And
just take it easy, wake up, don't load up and explode. Basic concept.
The thing, that all this stuff comes back to is comfort, right? So like, if it's not comfortable for you to do a certain thing, like it lights up and starts pulsing in a weird way that you're not cool with, maybe don't do that, or wait till that, or wait till you have enough of a background to know what that is and how to deal with it, because like that's what happened for me. It was just at a certain point I got, quote unquote, good enough, sensitive enough to feel what that thing was. And it was actually me squeezing everything hard, on a very on a very subtle level, going, and then making this thing light up, because I was kind of like,
concentrating.
Yeah. And it was like, oh wait, if I don't go like and grind my teeth, then it doesn't light up like that. So that was
good lesson.
But again, it's like most of those things you take it with time, and you just a little bit here, a little bit there, and they kind of wake up on their own. And I think
go.
Well, I was just going to say that I think the thing is, that there's this emphasis on these points in the head, because like once you get through the head, everything is, it's a weird thing that you can see it, you can look down, but you can't ever look at your head. And so feeling the stuff in your head is this very sort of meta type thing where you're, trying to have your brain feel your brain, And I think that there's something about getting through those first, it's like, it's like the uphill part is in the beginning, Once you clear your neck, it's kind of like literally all downhill from there, but the getting through those first few things, it's a real slog sometimes, because it's just like, that's where all, it happens to be where a lot of people also hold their tension, but
Sure.
but getting through that stuff is kind of, I think, a setup for, now you've got the basic stuff to keep going and, work with things like internal organs and stuff like that.
Totally. I think the third one is a good one. The eyes. The gate found directly in line with the pupil just behind the eyeball. And I've found that, dissolving that one tends to be really helpful. I felt my eyebrows and my eye and my forehead relax, and sort of my sides of my face and the whole eye socket. I think I must hold tension there, because whenever I dissolve around the eyes, I feel my brow sort of just relaxes and all the wrinkles go away and my face feels way more relaxed.
Yeah, and I don't know if he mentions it, probably does, but it's also connected to the optic nerve, which goes back into your brain. And so there's a lot of stuff about when you release the eyeball, you actually get this sort of draining effect from your brain, and it's just like everything from your brain kind of drops down into your belly. And so that's one of those, like, I don't want to use the term shortcut, but your eyes are a good, like if you can get your eyes to relax, everything else will relax a little bit.
Yeah, it seems to kick off the rest of the relaxing when you can get the eyes soft.
Yeah, it's a good starting point. It's like something that you can tangibly feel, and it kind of trickles down into other stuff.
Totally. So then he moves on to the center of the temples, the center of the ears. So you're moving sort of across the sides of your head, and then to the base of the skull. The point is located in the back of the head where the spine, atlas vertebrae, and the skull, occiput, meet. Here the spinal cord meets the brainstem. And that's one that he always mentions a lot, that occipital area in the back of the neck.
Well, yeah, and in terms of moving laterally or whatever, when you first learn these things, you have to go one by one. But as you get more relaxed, your mind can be in more places at once. And so you can be dissolving, for example, as you get lower in your body, you could be doing your elbows and your midriff and your, internal organs and, everything on a horizontal plane, right? So it doesn't take quite as long when you do it that way. But this piece about, you're not, as best you can, you want it to feel like a continuous downward flow, but there are times when you have to move, from one point to another. And it's, I don't know if the sequence is really that important, as long as you're generally moving down. If you did your temples before your eyes, I don't think that makes any difference. It's just
you sort of catch it all in a big net as you go, kind of.
Right, because it's sort of like the classic thing of, it's like a sheet of water, right? And as it pours down, some of it might go a little bit more on one side than the other, but essentially it's going to reach the bottom all at the same time, and that's kind of the bigger thing.
And so the next one is the roof of the mouth and the jaw. And I feel, I don't know about the roof of the mouth, but I do know that temporomandibular joint is something that I get tightened up. And so dissolving there, I can oftentimes get my jaw to sort of like let go a little bit. My teeth fall apart slightly, and it feels pretty good.
That's kind of what I was saying before, is that, like the head is where a lot of people hold a lot of tension. So, the jaw is another big one where people, it's something that you can catch yourself clenching and be like, oh shit, I'm clenching my jaw. And then, actually relax the thing, and then, feel a tangible, it went from tense to loose to relaxed. And that gives you kind of a frame of reference for the ice to water, water to gas on a physical level, right? Now you're starting to get, a physical thing. Same with, it's the same thing like with the eyes. You can feel it go from ice to water to gas, right? Mm-hmm. Where something like your shoulder muscle or your liver, you might not have that ability to feel it actually go through such a tangible physical change. So again, I think it's like I said, it's sort of setting you up, right? Or it's like training wheels for the more subtle stuff,
Absolutely. Some of them you can get pretty easy, and then you apply that to the more difficult ones as you go, kind of.
Yeah, it's like it gives you a taste, right, of what that thing feels like, and then you're able to replicate it or recognize it in other places, even though it may not be on the same level of intensity.
So then it looks like the final two in this section are the throat notch and the seventh cervical vertebrae, the gate found at the big vertebrae that usually sticks out at the base of the neck.
Right. So those two are a pair. They're like the, front and back of the same spot.
Mm.
And a lot of these points, that's how it's going, is that, you know, there's a corresponding one in the front or one in the back, or, you know, when you get to the joints, it's like there's top and bottom, you know, mirror each other kind of.
Mm.
So again, you know, like you can do them one at a time. You could do it more like a sheet of water where everything at that level gets dissolved at the same time. You know, but that's sort of more dependent on your level of ability. But those points are, I think those are key in terms of getting that alignment of your head over your shoulders. So again, it's part of this thing of like, you know, you're moving down your body, and as you move down, you're also trying to sort of adjust these micro alignments. And as you release something, there's going to be a minute increase in space. That's the opening part of, you know, opening the energy gate, right? And that when there's that little bit of opening of space, that you then can sort of take up that space by, not take up, but take advantage of that space by, you know, now it's easier to move something to fix the alignment. So this is sort of like chicken and egg thing that happens where, you know, the alignment makes it easier to release, the release makes it easier to align yourself. And, you know, just the more you can feel that area, I think that like it's easier to feel that sense of whether your head is going forward or back, or, you know, doing the sort of chicken neck thing.
And that cycle of training.
So, yeah. Exactly.
All right, bro. It's been great talking to you, man.
All right. Cheers.
Talk to you soon.
Yep.
Hey folks, this is Isaac again. Check out our Patreon for exclusive content. Jess has his blog program up there. I've got some classes and some training videos. There's also an interview with our good friend Eric Peters, a couple other things. So check that out. Also, like and subscribe, and you can check out our website for more information. Take care, and thanks for listening.